Welcome, Buddhist Stu here. Welcome to all of those who seek enlightenment. Today I'd like to talk to you about what God might think about the partisan politics in America. Now, before we start this discussion or contemplate what God might think, first we have to make a few definitions. First, when we talk about God, we have to assume that we're talking about God's perspective. God sees all things at all times, both past and present, here and now, and He sees the big picture. Sure, individual lives are important to each and every one of us, but how many times have you heard that God has bigger plans, or it's God's will? God knows best, because God sees all things and He has plans that we may not be aware of. So from that sense, we're going to look at partisan politics from the big picture, God's perspective, not the perspective of a particular individual or how it affects a particular individual. Next, we're going to look at how partisan politics might actually be used to help shape man or make man better. Now, we've all heard that God can make man better. And I know this is going to be controversial for some of you, but essentially becoming better is a form of evolution. We get better, things shape us, we learn, and we get better over time. So we evolve over time. So just like the white moth that during the Industrial Revolution was getting eaten by birds because they stood out on darkened trees that were darkened from pollution, some of the moths that were pigmented darker found that they survived, they bred more, they learned essentially to become better moths, which were black moths, and they didn't get eaten as much. And so the number of black moths increased dramatically over the white moths. Well, if you think about partisan politics as being black or white, left or right, then we can apply the fundamentals of evolution to partisan politics and man evolving to become better. So if you think about the population in the U.S. of partisans, we have approximately 20% of the population, 20-25% are Republicans, and 20-25% are Democrats. The other 60%, 50 to 60% in the middle, consider themselves to be centrist or leaning one way or the other. So, for example, you may think that it's okay to drill for oil, but you may also think that it's possible to do that while protecting the environment. Well, this puts you in the middle. You're not clearly on one side or the other of the issue. You think that there's compromise in between. Now, at first blush, you may think that the centrist people is the best way to go. Compromise, and that way we would move forward. But the problem with that is that maybe compromise and being a centrist doesn't cause us to get any better. We always pick the most compromising path, and that may not always cause us to become better. We kind of stay where we're already at. We maintain the capabilities we already have. We're not stressed on one side or the other. So partisan politics may serve this function to help us evolve. We go from strong right leanings to strong left leanings, and those cause us to machinate wildly around the center, and that may help us actually move forward and become better. For example, remember the 70s when we had polluted our rivers and industry had smokestacks and pollution was a big deal, and all of a sudden there was a social consciousness arose, especially within the youth, that we had to protect the environment. So we went from a very industrial capitalists sort of make money at all costs and don't worry about the environment on one side, to being very conservative, protect the environment, and maybe being overly cautious on the other. And so one swing led to the other swing, and we kind of settled back and forth. It's kind of a pendulum sort of action, and eventually, at some point in the future, we arrive at a situation where we want to make money, we want to develop our natural resources, but we don't want to destroy the environment. So in one way, you might imagine that we evolved because we experienced the very worst of polluting, and then the very best of polluting or protecting the environment, and we come to some sort of compromise and moved ahead on the issue, even though we may not have done that yet. Totally. At some point, that's our goal. So the left and the right swings may actually cause us to become better. When we move too far to the left and it works, then that's a good thing. If we move too far to the left and it's horrible, then we may swing back and move towards the right, and that may not work very well. And so we come up with some sort of compromise in the middle. But if we don't swing far to the left or far to the right, it's hard to figure out what the middle ground is. If we always pick a safe course in the middle, we may not ever understand the benefits that may lie towards the right or the left. We may pick a path that is so safe that we don't ever move forward and grow. So in this way, partisan politics may be what actually helps society and man become better in the long run. So even though us people in the middle may be very upset and scared by the people on the right and the people on the left that have these crazy ideas and want to go straying off in one direction that seems too extreme to us, that may actually be what helps us become better. Sure, it's a great idea to say, well, if we all just held hands, sang Kumbaya and compromised, we could all get through anything together. But that may not be true. And for us to think that we know that is to deny the infinite wisdom of God. After all, most people will say that God knows better than we do. So perhaps this is God's way of making sure that man improves and gets better and evolves, by giving us challenges and extremes, extremes on the left and extremes on the right, and in the end, we end up going down some center path that is really what it is we're meant to do. So without the extremes on the left and the right, we might be condemned to a future of mediocrity that will lead us nowhere, and we would never improve. So even though partisan politics may be upsetting, so something that we should contemplate as possibly being God's will and God's way of making us get better and evolve. Now, it's important to note, I'm not saying that this is God's plan. We don't know God's plan. But it doesn't hurt to contemplate that this is a possible plan, and that perhaps we shouldn't be quite as upset about it. Because when we're upset about it, it shows that we're trying to impose our will on the world. And our will may not be the same as God's will, and so we should not fight it. Be the Buddha.